Bamiyan's children cried their last before the sun set. The great Khan had decreed their world must end. On that day, he gave a command that froze the blood of men and beasts alike. His command was not war. It was a command that every living thing should be erased. No child was to be spared, no beast left grazing, no tree left rooted, no breath of life allowed to remain. This was not just a battle, it was vengeance. A grandson's death was answered with the death sentence of an entire city. The air shook with the crash of collapsing walls, and above it all, the endless screams of the doomed. By the time the sun set on Bamiyan again, it was no longer a city. It was a grave, and graves are dug for a reason. So what fate led to Bamiyan's silence? Who were the people behind those walls, and what had they done to summon the full fury of the great Khan? But before we continue, if you are interested in great empires and human history, subscribe to this channel. For Bamiyan's fall is only one chapter in the greatest stories history has ever written. To understand the fall of Bamiyan, you must first know the Khwarazmians, the empire that dared to challenge the Mongols. The Khwarazmian realm was no small kingdom. On the eve of the Mongol invasion, its dominion stretched wide and proud across Central Asia, Iran and Afghanistan, a vast quilt of deserts, mountains, and the glittering Silk Road cities. But it had not always been so grand. Once, Khwarazm was nothing more than a small province south of the Aral Sea. Its fate changed in the late 11th century when a Turkic slave commander, Anushtegin rose from obscurity. Around 1077, the Seljuk sultans appointed him as governor of Khwarazm. He was not a prince, but a Mamluk elevated by trust. Yet, from him began a dynasty that would one day rival the great empires of its age. But his sons and grandsons did not remain content as vassals. They grew restless under the Seljuk rule, so they plotted and fought to carve their own power. By the mid-12th century, Ala ad-Din Atsiz, Anushtegin's grandson, ruled from 1127 to 1156. He bowed in name to the Seljuks and to the Karakitai steppe empire, paying tribute when he must. But in his heart, he sharpened his own blade of power. His son Il-Arslan followed, ruling from 1156 to 1172. When Sultan Sanjar of the Seljuks died in 1157, the Seljuk grip collapsed. Arslan seized the chance, moving Khwarazm into Khurasan, northeastern Persia, casting away the last shadow of their overlords. From vassals, they became predators. By the late 12th century, Khwarazm stood no longer as a pawn, but as a rising power. It was in this era that a ruthless and ambitious ruler rose, Ala al-Din Tekish, son of Il-Arslan. Tekish came into power in 1172. He rose through blood, defeating his own brother to sit on the throne. He inherited his father's ambition. In 1194, Tekish crushed the last Seljuk Sultan, Togrul III, at the Battle of Ray. With Seljuk power shattered, Tekish swept into Persia, backed by the Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad. And by the time Tekish died suddenly in 1200, Khwarazmia stood as the supreme power of Persia and Central Asia. Yet beneath the glitter of conquest, there were cracks within the empire. The conquered Persians despised their Turkic overlords. In Iranian cities, locals rose up, slaughtering Khwarazmian garrisons and staining the streets with the blood of hated Turkic soldiers. Tekish's empire looked mighty from afar, but within, it was brittle, a mask of strength hiding resentment and unrest. Amidst this tension, Tekish's son, Ala ad-Din Muhammad II, ascended the throne. His reign began with rebellion from outside and rivalry from his own family. His own brother rose against him, challenging his ascension to the throne. Muhammad II spent the first years of his reign drowning in unrest and family intrigues, fighting simply to keep his crown. But Muhammad was bold, restless, and ambitious. Once he secured the throne, he struck outward with the hunger of a conqueror. By 1212 to 1213, he destroyed the Karakanid Khanate of Transoxiana. With it fell the ancient cities of Bukhara and Samarkand, jewels of the Silk Road. To the southeast, he moved into the mountains, where the Ghurid Empire had collapsed after the murder of Sultan Muhammad Ghuri in 1206. By 1215, Muhammad R had seized the remnants of the Ghurid realm, adding to his conquest. Now, Khwarazmian rule stretched farther than before, from the deserts of Transoxiana to the mountains of modern Afghanistan, from Persia's plains to the borders of India, encompassing much of Iran and Central Asia. Northward, he grasped the steppes once ruled by the Kipchaks. Southward, he claimed the Persian Gulf's trade hubs. He called himself Shah of Khwarazm, master without rival, owing allegiance to no caliph or overlord. And so, during his reign, the Khwarazmian Empire stood vast and proud. Within this empire, a boy was growing into a man whose courage and tragedy would echo through the ages. His name was Jalal al-Din Mangburni, the eldest son of Shah Muhammad II. He was born around 1199 in the dazzling court of Gurganj. From childhood, he was trained in horsemanship, archery, and the hard art of leadership. Yet he faced hardship because of his mother's status. She was a Turkmen concubine, not a noble princess, and for this reason, the elite scorned him. So Jalal al-Din was forced to prove his worth not by lineage, but by deeds. And he did. In 1215, his father entrusted him with southwestern territories, including former Ghurid lands, the most dangerous frontier of the realm. There, rebellion simmered like fire under ash. But Jalal al-Din fought with fire and steel. He crushed rebellious chiefs, broke border raiders, and won victories that echoed in the Shah's ears. By the late 1210s, Jalal al-Din had become his father's most trusted commander. His victories lifted him high in the eyes of the people. Many saw him as the future of the empire, a brave and charismatic prince. To them, he was everything his father was not. But by the early 1200s, while the empire prospered and Jalal al-Din's star ascended, a new power was rising in the east. In 1206, Genghis Khan had united the Mongol and Turkic tribes into a fearsome military on the endless grasslands of the east. At first, fate allowed Khwarazm and the Mongols to live as neighbors. In 1218, when the Mongols crushed the Karakatai kingdom, the last buffer between them vanished. The two great empires now shared a border, yet there was no war. In fact, Genghis Khan did not want war. He was already deep in battle against the Jin dynasty of northern China. A Western campaign would overstrain his armies, so he sought for peace. He sent words of friendship to Shah Muhammad, saying, "I am the master of the lands of the rising sun, while you rule those of the setting sun. Let us conclude a firm treaty of friendship and peace," and he meant it. The Mongols had horses, meat, and hides, but they lacked fine steel, cloth, jewels, and perfumes. Khwarazm could supply these. Trade would profit both empires. So to prove his sincerity, Genghis sent a caravan of 450 merchants across the border to Khwarazm, escorted by Mongol envoys. This was not an army. It was a peace offering. But when the caravan reached the Khwarazmian border city of Otrar, in modern Kazakhstan, in 1218, everything changed. Otrar's city governor was Inalchuk, the Shah's uncle. Inalchuk accused the merchant convoy of spying and seized their goods, though there were said to be other motives for his distrust. Some report says a caravan member insulted him by addressing him by his bare name instead of his title. Yet many believed he simply wanted their treasure out of greed. In any case, with the Shah's consent, Inalchuk seized the merchants, slaughtered them, and seized their goods. It was a crime against trust, a crime against the very code of the steppe. But when news of the Otrar atrocity reached Genghis Khan, he did not respond with war. He still hoped for peace. So in 1219, he sent 3 ambassadors, a Muslim and 2 Mongols, to Shah Muhammad himself, demanding justice. Genghis Khan's message was simple: punish the governor who shed innocent blood. Return what was taken. Let peace stand. The Shah had a choice. His ministers advised him to take caution. They warned him that the Mongols were not mere nomads, and that to provoke them was folly. But Muhammad II was deafened by pride. To him, the Mongols were still savages on horseback, unworthy of fear. And so, he chose arrogance. He executed the ambassadors. According to one story, he killed the Muslim envoy and humiliated the Mongols by shaving their beards, a grave insult. Others say all 3 were slain. At the same time, he ordered the remaining caravan survivors to be butchered. When Genghis Khan heard the news, he said coldly that the Shah had chosen war, and war he will have. In late 1219, the Mongol war machine moved to punish the Khwarazmian Empire. A defector from the Shah's own circle fled to Genghis and revealed that the Shah's house was divided. The Khan turned this knowledge into a blade. He forged letters, fake messages written as if from Turkin Khatun's allies, accusing the Shah of dishonoring his mother. When Muhammad II saw these, his heart filled with fear. He saw betrayal in every face, and out of fear and anger, he made the greatest mistake that cost him his empire. His generals begged him to gather the full army and strike the Mongols in open battle before they could take his cities one by one. The Shah refused. He did not trust his men to stay loyal in the field. Instead, he scattered them, sending garrisons to every major city. Behind high walls, he thought, they would be safe, but walls cannot fight, and the Mongols did not fear walls. In early 1220, the Mongols struck. 3 armies swept across the Sirdaria. Genghis himself led some of his men through the Kizilkum Desert, appearing suddenly behind Bukhara like a ghost. Other columns crushed Otrar and stormed the Fergana Valley. One by one, the Shah's cities began to fall. Bukhara opened its gates out of fear. Samarkand collapsed when parts of its army defected. Otrar resisted at first for 5 bitter months until treachery opened a gate. Inalchuk, the greedy governor who had begun it all, was captured. His punishment was legendary. Molten silver was poured into his eyes and ears, so that his hunger for wealth was fed at last in death. Everywhere, the Mongols unleashed terror. The Khwarazmian Empire crumbled like sand under a storm. Shah Muhammad fled. He left his capital, Gurganj, in the hands of his mother. Genghis sent his generals, Jebe and Subutai, to hunt him down. By the winter of 1220, the mighty Shah of Khwarazm was no more than a fugitive, cold and starving, hiding on a Caspian shore. There, sick and broken, he died on a lonely island. At the end, the empire of Khwarazm lay in ruins, utterly destroyed. But out of those ruins, one figure rose like a shadow, refusing to be swallowed by night. Jalal al-Din Mangburni, the last heir of Khwarazm. He was young, fierce, and unbroken by despair. Where others saw the Mongols as an unstoppable storm, Jalal saw men who could bleed. In the early months of 1221, he gathered what remained of his father's shattered army. To their ranks came Afghan highland tribesmen, wild, hardened men of the mountains, drawn by his fire. Together, in the rugged valleys of modern Afghanistan, they lit a flame of resistance. The Mongols ruled the plains and the cities, but Jalal chose the mountains, where stone and snow stood his allies. From Ghazni and the jagged hinterlands around it, he struck like a hawk. He ambushed Mongol patrols, burning their outposts and slipping away before their great war machine could crush him. His men were few, their weapons mismatched, but his courage was iron. In September 1221, word reached Jalal that a Mongol force was marching nearby, led by Shigi Kutugu, one of Genghis Khan's trusted generals, and some said his son-in-law was with them. Jalal did not hesitate. He rallied his men, Turks and Afghans alike, and marched to meet them. The battle raged from dawn to dusk. Dust and arrows filled the sky. The ground shook beneath the hooves of charging horsemen. Jalal al-Din fought at the front, his sword flashing like fire, his voice carrying across the chaos. And then, in the heat of battle, Shigi Kutugu fell. The great Mongol commander lay slain, and his troops broke. By sunset, the impossible had happened. The Mongols had been defeated. When the spoils of battle were gathered, a quarrel broke out among Jalal's men about how they would be divided. The men turned against one another, and by nightfall, the Pashtun tribesmen had walked away. In one breath, Jalal al-Din lost half his army. When news of Shigi Kutugu's death reached the ears of the great Khan, he was consumed by fury. His pride was scarred. He rode himself, with an army at his back, to hunt the boy prince who had dared to scar his pride. The mountains stood quiet in the spring of 1221, but in their valleys a storm was rushing in. The sounds of hooves thundered like earthquakes. Genghis Khan and his army chased the last Khwarazmian prince, Jalal al-Din Mangburni. On the way, his march brought him to Bamiyan, a proud city high in the valley on the Silk Road. Bamiyan was no ordinary city. At its heart was the citadel of Shahr-e Gholghola, the city of screams. A fortress carved from a steep hill, its walls reaching like stone claws into the sky. Behind its walls stood Khwarazmian troops, local militias and loyalists of Jalal al-Din. They knew who was coming, yet they chose not to surrender. They stood defiant, ready to die rather than bend to the Mongols. Genghis Khan looked upon those walls and decided Bamiyan would fall, no matter the cost. The Mongols spread around Bamiyan like a tightening noose. They sealed every road and every mountain path. With them, they brought their tools of terror, their siege engines, towers, and catapults built by Chinese captives. These men hurled stones the size of oxen's heads, and sometimes fire wrapped in strange powders that burst into flames on impact against the walls of Bamiyan. Arrows rained like storms against its battlements, while sappers crept forward, digging and dragging their towers closer. Every day the Mongols tested the walls, scaling ladders, pushing rams, probing the gates. And every day, Bamiyan fought back. Inside the city, the defenders fought with desperation. They greeted every attempt against their wall with stones, arrows, and fire. The narrow valley floor turned red with blood. At night, the defenders would rush out to burn siege works, striking Mongols in desperate raids. For weeks and months, the siege dragged on. The Mongols, who had conquered cities in days, were held at bay. For Genghis Khan, this was an insult. He was the terror of the world. Cities usually fell like wheat before the scythe. Yet here, on this narrow mountain, men dared hold against him. Each day of defiance stoked his rage. Still, he swore that Bamiyan must fall. Then came the arrow that cursed the valley forever. Before the gates of the red citadel of Shahr-e Zohak, a Mongol boy rode into battle. An arrow flew from Bamiyan's walls and struck him down. But the boy was not just any Mongol. He was Mutugen, the beloved 15-year-old grandson of Genghis Khan, son of Chagatai. The boy was the Mongols' future, a light in the Khan's line. He died before the citadel. When the news reached Genghis, his grief was a fire that melted into rage. His voice thundered through the camp. Bamiyan would not just fall. Bamiyan would die. Every living thing, man, woman, child, and beast, was marked for death. From that moment, the siege turned savage. The catapults roared day and night without pause. Warriors fought with so much brutality, driven not just by duty, but by vengeance. They mocked the defenders, shouting promises of slaughter. No surrender would be accepted, no mercy shown. Inside Bamiyan, despair spread like smoke. The defenders knew their fate, yet still they resisted, clinging to their crumbling fortress, until betrayal crept in with the night. One local legend tells of betrayal by Jalal al-Din's own daughter. Angry with her father, she betrayed Bamiyan to the Mongols. Tying her message to an arrow, she revealed the hidden water conduit of the citadel. The Mongols diverted the water and found the secret entrance. Through it, they poured into the fortress like a flood. Whether this legend is true or not, it captured the horror of that night. Bamiyan fell not only by stone and steel, but by treachery. When the Mongols stormed the city, the streets turned into rivers of blood. The defenders fought to the last, blades clashing in the halls of their citadel, but they were swept aside. No plea was heard, no life was spared. Soldiers, children, mothers, elders, even animals in the pen were cut down. By dawn, only the echoes of screams hung in the valley. From that day forward, the fortress earned the name, the City of Screams. Others called it the City of Sorrows, or the City of Noise, remembering the last cries of the dying. But the vengeance did not end with lives. Genghis Khan's soldiers looted every treasure. Houses, markets, mosques, and palaces were torn down or burned. Irrigation canals, the lifeblood of the fertile Bamiyan Valley, were smashed and filled with rubble. Gardens were trampled, crops destroyed, livestock butchered. Even its cultural and historical heritage suffered. The valley had been known for centuries as a place of wonder, home to colossal Buddhas carved into cliffs and to monasteries and shrines. Though the giant statues still stood for centuries more, many of the smaller temples, libraries, and relics were destroyed in the fire. Bamiyan was not merely conquered, it was erased. According to later accounts, Genghis Khan cursed the city. He decreed that no soul should rebuild it, and for generations that command was obeyed. And when the smoke cleared over Bamiyan, the valley was no longer a city, it was a grave. But Genghis Khan did not stay to look upon the ruins. His vengeance was complete, his wrath satisfied. Bamiyan had been made an example, but his war was not yet done. The Khwarazmian prince Jalal al-Din still lived, and the Khan would not rest until the boy king was broken? Through the high passes of the Hindu Kush, the great Khan pursued him. Southward, the chase went, predator and prey across mountains that scraped the sky. Finally, on the banks of the Indus River in November 1221, the hunt reached its end. There, Jalal al-Din stood with the ragged remnants of his army. The young prince, fierce and desperate, prepared for his final stand. Against the Mongol tide, he fought bravely, his sword flashing like a star in the dust. But courage cannot stop a storm. His men fell, cut down by Mongol arrows, and his banners crumpled into the river mud. Cornered, Jalal al-Din made one last gamble. He spurred his horse to the river's edge, armor gleaming. With the Mongols closing in, he drove his mount into the roaring torrent. Waves swallowed him and his horse, but he did not turn back. He swam, armored and defiant, across the river. On the far bank, dripping and breathless, Jalal al-Din turned to look back. Genghis Khan stood watching from the opposite shore. The Khan's army had won. The Khwarazmian Empire was ashes, its prince a fugitive. And so it is said that the great Khan raised his hand in a gesture not of rage, but of respect. He marveled at the boy's courage, even as his realm was no more. Jalal al-Din fled into India. For years, he wandered as a king without a kingdom, gathering followers and losing them as quickly as he gathered them, fighting battles he never won. At last, in 1231, a decade later, he was killed. Some sources stated that he was killed by a Kurdish bandit while fleeing near Diyarbakir, in modern Turkey. Others say he was assassinated by Kurdish peasants or local tribesmen, and with his death, the Khwarazmian royal line was ended. By then, resistance in the east was gone. The Khwarazmian Empire had been swallowed whole. By the end of 1221, Transoxiana and Khurasan lay in Mongol hands. Cities like Merv and Nishapur had already been obliterated by Genghis's son Tolui, and now Bamiyan too was gone. The Mongol war machine tightened its grip. Military governors were set in place. Garrisons occupied key fortresses. Some say Mongol families even settled in the Bamiyan Valley, their blood mixing with the highland people who survived elsewhere, perhaps giving rise to the Hazara of today. But what mattered more than the land itself was the terror that followed. Bamiyan became a whisper in the wind. Merchants carried the tale of a city wiped from the earth, of silence commanded by a Khan whose grandson had died. Fear spread faster than the Mongol horsemen ever could, by merchants and envoys across Asia. For the Mongols, Bamiyan was a legend, a cursed place, remembered in their tradition as a city that dared to defy them and paid the ultimate price. Chroniclers like Juvayni wrote of it with sorrow, calling it the city of sorrows, the city of screams, the place where an empire's last hope bled into the dust. Jalal al-Din was remembered as a hero, a fighter worth 1,000 men, though his fight was doomed from the start. Even now, Bamiyan's Valley is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, some of its ruins standing as testimony. They whisper of fire and vengeance, of courage and betrayal, of the day grief turned into wrath and wiped a city from the earth. The city of screams is gone, yet it still speaks. If you enjoyed this historical video, like and subscribe for more contents like this.